The blue light from the data screens painted Counselor Vextar's gray skin in cold colors. His long fingers moved across the control panel with practiced ease. Each tap deleted another file from the Galactic Council's vast archives. Each tap erased another piece of history that the Council deemed dangerous. The archives were perfect now. Clean. Safe. Every record told the story the Council wanted told. No messy details. No uncomfortable truths. No heroes who might inspire others to ask difficult questions. Vextar paused at one final file cluster. The name made his throat tighten with old anger. Captain Lihana, the human who had caused so much trouble 5 years ago. The woman who had defied direct orders and saved millions of lives in the process. The fool who had almost exposed secrets that could topple governments. He selected all files containing her name. Ship records, mission reports, medal ceremonies, even casual mentions in other documents. His finger hovered over the delete command for just a moment. Then he pressed it. The screens flashed green, data purged, memory erased, history rewritten. Captain, Lihana had never existed. 3,000 light-years away on Luna Colony, Kim Jisoo wiped sweat from his forehead and crawled deeper into the maintenance tunnel. The old mining equipment down here was ancient by galactic standards. Some of the gear was 50 years old, still running on primitive human technology from before they joined the Galactic Council. The fusion reactor had been acting up again. Nothing serious, just small glitches in the control systems. Jisoo had been fixing these old machines since he was 16. Now, at 32, he could diagnose problems in his sleep. He plugged his diagnostic tool into the main computer core and waited for the scan to complete. The screen filled with code and error messages. Most of it was routine stuff, worn circuits, aging processors, standard maintenance items, but one error message made him frown. It was buried deep in the system logs, in a section that should have been empty. The timestamp showed it was 5 years old, but the file structure was corrupted. Jisoo had seen this kind of damage before. It happened when someone tried to delete data but did not do it properly. He copied the corrupted files to his personal device. Maybe he could recover some of the data later. Right now he had a reactor to fix. The repair took 2 hours. As Jisoo packed up his tools, he noticed something else strange. Scratched into the metal wall next to the reactor core were Korean characters. They looked fresh, carved with a precision tool sometime in the last few years. The characters spelled out 2 words, Stone Carver. Jisoo had never heard that nickname before. It meant nothing to him. But something about the careful way it was carved made him think it was important to whoever put it there. On the other side of the galaxy, Park Min-ho brushed dirt from the stone surface and sat back on his heels. The archaeological dig on New Busan had been routine until today. They were excavating the foundations of the first colonial settlement, looking for artifacts that might tell them about the early human pioneers. Instead, they had found something that should not exist. The stone monument was clearly human-made. The carving style was distinctly Korean, using traditional techniques that dated back thousands of years on Earth. But according to the official colonial records, New Busan had been settled only 23 years ago. This stone looked much older. The inscription was simple. Korean characters carved deep into the rock, weathered by time but still readable. It was a name, Lihana. Below the name was a date from 28 years ago, and below that a simple phrase, "She saved us all." Min-ho called his assistant over. "Have you ever heard of someone named Lihana?" The younger man shook his head. "Should I have?" "I do not know. But someone thought she was important enough to carve her name in stone." Min-ho took photos of the monument from every angle. Then he started a search through the colonial database for any mention of Lihana. The search came back empty. No records, no files, no trace of anyone by that name ever living on New Busan. But here was her name, carved in stone by human hands. Someone had gone to great effort to make sure she would be remembered. As evening fell on New Busan, Min-ho walked through the small colonial town asking questions. The older settlers were curious about his find, but none of them recognized the name. A few mentioned that their grandparents had sometimes talked about the captain who would not let them die, but they assumed it was just an old story. An elderly woman named Mrs. Cho looked at the photos for a long time. Finally, she nodded slowly. "My grandmother used to tell stories," she said, "about the early days before the official colony ships arrived. She said there were people here before the records began, people who came to hide from something terrible." "What kind of terrible thing?" Mrs. Cho shrugged. She never said exactly, but she always ended the stories the same way. She would say that someone saved them when no one else would, someone who flew into the dark to bring back the light. That night, Minho sat in his small apartment reviewing his notes. 3 things bothered him about the monument. First, it predated the official settlement by several years. Second, it was made with professional stone carving tools, not the simple equipment early colonists would have carried. Third, whoever carved it had taken great care to make sure it would last. This was not a casual memorial. This was deliberate preservation. Meanwhile, on the agricultural world of Jeju 7, teacher Choi Yuna was having her own mysterious encounter. She had noticed that several of her students were drawing the same symbol in their notebooks. It was simple but distinctive, a small ship surrounded by 5 stars with Korean characters underneath. When she asked about it, 10-year-old Seong pointed toward the window. "It is from the memorial garden, Teacher Choi. My grandmother showed it to me." After school, Yuna walked to the memorial garden at the edge of town. It was a peaceful place where families came to remember loved ones. But as she looked more carefully at the older monuments, she noticed something strange, mixed in. With the traditional memorial stones were markers that did not fit. They were older, weathered by decades of wind and rain. The Korean text on them was carved in an archaic style, and her universal translator seemed unable to process the characters properly. One stone in particular caught her attention. It was larger than the others and positioned at the center of the garden. The carving showed the same ship and star symbol her students had been drawing. Below it were Korean characters that her translator kept rendering as data corrupted, but Yuna could read Korean perfectly well. The characters were clear despite their age. They spelled out a name, Lee Hana, and below that, a simple message: "Remember the stone carver." As the sun set over Jeju 7, Yuna found herself wondering who Lee Hana was, and why someone had worked so hard to make sure her name would not be forgotten. In Omai, the Galactic Council archives, Counselor Vextar reviewed his work one final time. Every digital trace of Captain Lee Hana had been eliminated. The embarrassing incident 5 years ago was now officially erased from history. He smiled with satisfaction and powered down his workstation. The truth was what the Council said it was. Nothing more, nothing less. But 3,000 light-years away, human hands were already at work. In mining tunnels and memorial gardens, on cliff faces and monument stones, ordinary people were quietly preserving the memory of someone they refused to forget. The Council had burned her name from their records, but humans kept carving it in stone. Kim Jisoo spent 3 sleepless nights working on the corrupted data files. His small apartment on Luna Colony was cluttered with old computer equipment and empty coffee cups. The fragments he had found in the mining reactor were more complex than he first thought. The corruption was not random. Someone had deliberately hidden pieces of information inside the system logs, disguised as routine maintenance records. It was clever work, the kind that would fool automated censorship programs but could be decoded by someone who knew what to look for. Jisoo did not know what to look for, but he was stubborn. He wrote programs to sort through the fragments, looking for patterns. Slowly, pieces of a story began to emerge. The first clear fragment was a ship's log entry dated 5 years ago. The voice recording was damaged, but he could make out a woman speaking in Korean accented English. Captain's log, Day 12 of the Void Plague outbreak. The Council has ordered all ships to maintain quarantine distance. But there are children down there. I cannot just watch them die. The second fragment was a medical report. Most of it was corrupted, but Jisoo could read enough to understand that something called the Void Plague had killed millions across 3 star systems. The report mentioned experimental treatments and someone who had violated direct orders to deliver medical supplies to infected colonies. By the 4th night, Jisoo had recovered enough fragments to realize he was looking at pieces of a cover-up. Someone had tried very hard to erase these records, but the person who hid them had been just as determined to preserve them. The final fragment was the most disturbing. It was a partial communication between 2 Galactic Council officials. The human captain's actions have created complications. Her evidence regarding the plague's origin cannot be allowed to spread. Recommend immediate classification and memory wipe protocols. Jisoo sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. The woman in the ship's log had been Captain Lee Hana. Same name carved into the reactor room wall. The same name someone had called Stonecarver. She had saved people during a plague outbreak, and then the council had erased her from history. On New Busan, Park Min-ho's archaeological team had found 7 more monuments. Each one was carved by different hands, in different styles, but all bore the same name, Lee Hana. The dates ranged from 28 years ago to just last month. Someone had been adding to this memorial site for decades. Min-ho interviewed the oldest residents of New Busan, asking about the early settlement days. Most claimed to remember nothing unusual, but a few elderly people would get a distant look in their eyes when he mentioned the name Lee Hana. Mrs. Cho introduced him to her neighbor, Mr. Kim Tae-hyun, who was 92 years old. The old man had been one of the first settlers on New Busan, arriving as a young engineer on the 2nd colony ship. The first ship never made it to the official records, Mr. Kim said quietly. It was not supposed to exist. People fleeing from the plague zones, carrying refugees who had nowhere else to go. What happened to them? Mr. Kim looked around nervously, then leaned closer. There was a captain, Korean woman. She had commandeered a council medical ship and filled it with refugees from the infected systems. When they arrived here, she told them to hide. To wait until the official colonies were established, then blend in with the regular settlers. Why hide? Because helping plague refugees was illegal. The council's quarantine orders were absolute. Anyone who violated them faced court-martial and memory reconditioning. Min-ho felt a chill. Memory reconditioning? They erase your mind, make you forget everything that happened. Sometimes they give you a new identity entirely. Mr. Kim's hands shook slightly. The captain knew they would come for her eventually, so she told us to remember her story in ways that could not be erased, told us to carve it in stone. That evening, Min-ho walked through the memorial site again. Now he understood what he was looking at. This was not just a monument to one woman. It was a promise kept by hundreds of people over 3 decades. Every new carving was someone adding their voice to the collective memory. The council could delete computer files, but they could not delete stone. On Jeju 7, teacher Choi Yuna had started asking her students about the symbols they drew. The children were surprisingly knowledgeable about the memorial garden, even though most adults seemed to ignore it. 8-year-old Park Ji-young explained it best. My Halmione taught me the stone game. You stack the stones in patterns, and each pattern tells part of the story. She said the adults forgot how to read the patterns, but children still remember. Yuna asked the girl to show her the stone game. After school, they walked to the memorial garden together. Ji-young led her to an area Yuna had not noticed before, where hundreds of small stones were arranged in careful patterns. This stack tells about the sick people, Ji-young said, pointing to a complex arrangement of 12 stones. This one tells about the ship that came to help them, and this big one tells about the captain who would not leave them behind. As Ji-young explained each pattern, Yuna realized she was looking at an entire information storage system. The adults saw random stone arrangements left by playing children, but the children were actually preserving a detailed historical record, passing it down through generations like an ancient oral tradition. That night, Yuna called her own grandmother, in Seoul. The old woman listened carefully as Yuna described the memorial garden and the stone patterns. Ah, her grandmother said finally. You found one of the memory stones. I wondered if any still existed. Memory stones? During the Japanese occupation, when they tried to erase Korean culture, we developed ways to hide our stories. Stone stacking was one method. Children would learn the patterns as games, never realizing they were preserving forbidden history. Yuna felt her breath catch. Someone is using traditional Korean methods to preserve illegal history? It sounds like it. The question is, what story is so important that people would risk their lives to keep it alive? Over the following weeks, Yuna began teaching herself to read the stone patterns. The story they told was remarkable. A plague had swept through the outer colonies 5 years ago. The Galactic Council had abandoned entire star systems, leaving millions to die rather than risk the infection spreading. But one ship captain had refused to follow orders. She had stolen medical supplies and evacuated refugees, carrying them to safety even though it meant her own destruction. The people she saved had scattered across the galaxy, but they all remembered her name, Lee Hana, the stone carver, the captain, who would not let them die. As Yuna learned more about the stone patterns, she realized something important. This was not just happening on Jeju 7. The children mentioned that their grandparents had taught them these patterns, and their grandparents had learned them on other worlds. If the pattern held true, there were memory stones on dozens of human colonies, maybe hundreds, all telling the same story in ways that could not be digitally erased. The council had burned Captain Lee Hana's name from their official records, but across the galaxy, human hands continued to stack stones and carve monuments, keeping her memory alive through the most ancient and reliable form of data storage ever invented. Physical memory, passed from generation to generation, written in stone and preserved in the hearts of those who refused to forget. The whispers were growing louder. Kim Jisu's hands trembled as he read the message on his personal communicator. It was from an archaeological team on New Busan, asking if he had ever heard of someone called the Stone Carver. They had found his contact information in an old engineering forum where he had posted questions about corrupted data recovery. The message was from Dr. Park Min-ho. Jisoo stared at the name, wondering if this was coincidence or something more. He decided to take the risk and reply. 2 days later, Jisoo was on a transport ship heading for New Busan. The journey took 18 hours, plenty of time to think about what he was doing. He was potentially meeting with strangers who might be criminals or terrorists. The Galactic Council did not look kindly on people who dug up erased history, but the data fragments he had recovered told a story that demanded to be heard. Captain Lee Hana had saved millions of lives. She deserved better than being forgotten. Park Min-ho met him at the New Busan spaceport. The archaeologist was younger than Jisoo expected, maybe 30 years old, with the kind of intense focus that came from spending years studying tiny details. "Thank you for coming," Min-ho said as they walked to his ground vehicle. "I was not sure you would respond to my message." "I almost did not. But then I thought about what my grandfather would have said." Min-ho glanced at him. "Your grandfather?" "Kim. Daewon. He was an engineer like me, worked on the old colony ships. He died 3 years ago, but before he passed he told me some strange things. About hidden data caches and important stories that someone was trying to erase." They drove to the archaeological site in silence. When they arrived, Jisoo saw the stone monuments and felt his throat tighten. The carvings were beautiful and terrible at the same time. Beautiful because they represented love and memory. Terrible because they showed how far people would go to preserve truth. "There are 43 monuments now," Min-ho said. "We find new ones every week. Some are carved by professional stoneworkers. Others are scratched into rocks by children. But they all say the same thing." Jisoo knelt beside the largest monument and traced the Korean characters with his finger. "Lee Hana, she saved us all. What did you find in your data recovery?" Jisoo told him about the hidden fragments, the ship logs, and the evidence of a cover-up. Min-ho listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding as pieces of the puzzle fell into place. "There is something else," Jisoo said. "The fragments mention that the void plague was not natural. Someone created it deliberately." Min-ho's eyes widened. A biological weapon? That is what the medical reports suggest, and Captain Lee Hana found evidence that proved it. That is why they erased her memory. She knew too much. That evening, they contacted Choi Yuna on Jeju 7. The teacher was excited to hear from them, but also frightened. Her investigation into the memorial garden had attracted attention from local authorities. Someone reported me for asking too many questions about the stone patterns, she said over the video call. A council inspector came to my school yesterday. He wanted to know why I was encouraging students to play with unauthorized historical markers. Are you in danger? Minho asked. Not yet, but I think we need to be more careful. The council has monitoring systems that track unusual human activities. If too many people start asking about Lihana at the same time, they will notice. Jisoo had an idea. What if we are not the only ones investigating? What if there are others, like us, on different worlds? They spent the next 3 days creating a secure communication network. Using techniques Jisoo had learned from his grandfather, they built a system that disguised their messages as routine engineering reports and archaeological surveys. Within a week, they had contact with 12 other people across 8 different worlds. All of them had found traces of Captain Lihana's story. All of them had discovered that someone was working very hard to keep her memory alive. Dr. Song Minji from the Andromeda Station had found ship maintenance records that mentioned a irregular cargo manifest during the plague crisis. The cargo manifest had been deleted, but the maintenance records showed that someone had been modifying medical transport ships for refugee evacuation. Engineer Yu Sungmin from Titan Base had discovered that his own father had been one of the people saved by Captain Lee Hana. The old man had never talked about it directly, but he had spent 40 years carving her name into asteroid mining tunnels throughout the solar system. Teacher Lee Soo-young from New Seoul had found an entire network of memorial gardens maintained by families of plague survivors. The gardens looked like simple meditation spaces, but they were actually sophisticated information storage systems using traditional Korean landscape design. As the network grew, a pattern emerged. Captain Lee Hana had not just saved a few thousand refugees. She had coordinated a massive evacuation effort across 3 star systems, working with other ship captains who had also defied council orders. Together they had saved over 2 million people, but the evidence showed something else. The Void Plague had been created by a secret faction within the Galactic Council as a test of their new biological weapons. The plague had escaped containment and spread beyond their control. Captain Lee Hana had discovered this truth and planned to expose it to the galactic media. The council had stopped her by erasing her memory and reassigning her to a remote patrol sector. But they had not counted on the refugees she saved. Those people had spread across the galaxy, and they had told their children and grandchildren about the captain who would not let them die. For 5 years, the survivors and their families had been quietly building monuments and hiding evidence. They knew that digital records could be erased, but stone carvings and oral traditions were much harder to destroy. Jisoo realized that his grandfather had been part of this network. The old man had hidden data fragments in dozens of systems, disguising them as maintenance logs and diagnostic reports. He had been one of many people working to preserve Captain Lee Hana's story. "We are not discovering this by accident," Jisoo told the others during their weekly video conference. "We are finding these things because we were meant to find them." The survivors left clues for the next generation. Choi Yuna nodded. "My grandmother always said that the most important stories find their way to the people who need to hear them." But their investigation had not gone unnoticed. On the Galactic Council's primary monitoring station, automated systems flagged unusual patterns in human communication networks. The algorithms detected increased mentions of Korean names, heightened interest in historical records, and coordinated archaeological activities. Counselor Vexitar received the alert with growing unease. The report showed that humans across multiple star systems were engaging in what the AI called synchronized memorial behavior. They were building monuments, sharing stories, and preserving information in ways that bypassed digital monitoring. "Impossible," he muttered. "I deleted everything. Every file, every record, every trace." But as he read the detailed report, Vextar, began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. He had erased Captain Lihana from the Council's databases, but he had forgotten that humans did not rely only on digital memory. They carved their most important stories in stone. They passed them down through families. They built monuments that would last for centuries. They created networks of memory that could not be deleted or corrupted. Vextar had burned her name from the official records, but humans had been carving it in stone for 5 years, and now their children were learning to read those carvings. The pattern was spreading, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The truth was written in stone, and stone endured forever. Park Minho had never seen anything like it. The cliff face on New Busan stretched for nearly a kilometer, and every square meter had been carved with incredible precision. What had seemed like natural rock formations from a distance revealed itself to be the largest human-made monument in the galaxy. "How long have you known about this?" he asked Dr. Choi Won-shik, the elderly geologist who had led him to the site. "My team discovered it 2 months ago during a mineral survey, but we could not understand what we were looking at until you started asking questions about Lihana." The monument told a complete story in pictures and symbols that needed no translation. At the bottom, carved figures showed the spread of a plague across star systems with dying people reaching toward empty skies. In the middle section, ships appeared, carrying medical supplies and rescuing survivors. At the top, a single figure stood against a background of stars, holding what appeared to be evidence or documents. "This is not the work of one person," Minho said, running his hands over the carved stone. "Look at the different tool marks, the varying styles. Hundreds of people worked on this." "Maybe thousands," Dr. Choi agreed. "The carbon dating shows that the oldest carvings are nearly 30 years old. People have been adding to it ever since." Minho called Kim Jisoo and Choi Yuna immediately. Within hours, they were both on transport ships heading for New Busan. This discovery changed everything they thought they knew about the scale of Captain Lihana's story. While waiting for his friends to arrive, Minho interviewed the local residents. What he learned amazed him. The cliff carving was not a secret. Everyone in the area knew about it, but they had never talked about it with outsiders. "My grandfather brought me here when I was 7, said Mrs. Park In-ju, a farmer whose family had lived on New Busan for 25 years. He told me this was where we came to remember the captain. He said that as long as the stone stands, her story will not be forgotten." "Did he tell you what happened?" Mrs. Park nodded. "The plague ships arrived in 2387. Thousands of refugees, mostly families with children. They were sick and dying. The Galactic Council had abandoned them, but Captain Lihana brought them here." "Why here? New Busan was not even a registered colony yet." "That was the point. She knew the Council would try to stop her if she went to an official world. So she found a place where people could hide until the plague passed and they could start new lives." Mrs. Park led him to a small village that did not appear on any official maps. The houses were simple but well built, designed to blend into the natural landscape. Nearly 200 people lived there, all descendants of plague refugees. "We have been waiting for someone to come and ask the right questions," said the village elder, Mr. Lee Young-ho. "Captain Lihana told us that someday people would try to erase what happened. She said we should carve the truth in stone and wait for those who needed to know." That evening, when Jisoo and Yuna arrived, the 3 friends stood before the massive cliff carving as the sun set behind them. The monument seemed to glow in the fading light, every carved symbol clearly visible. Jisoo had brought his data recovery equipment. As they examined the monument more closely, he found something extraordinary. Hidden among the carved symbols were patterns that matched the corrupted data fragments he had recovered from Luna Colony. "She did not just tell them to carve her story," he said with growing excitement. "She gave them the technical specifications for hiding digital information in stone patterns. Look at these geometric shapes, they are encoding methods." Using his equipment, Jisoo scanned the entire cliff face. The results were staggering. The monument was not just a memorial. It was a massive data storage device containing thousands of files hidden in the carved patterns. Ship logs, medical records, communication transcripts, even video files, he said, reading from his scanner. Everything the council tried to erase is here, encoded in stone. Yuna found the most important section. At the very top of the cliff, carved in Korean characters so large they could be seen from orbit, was Captain Lee Hana's final message. Jisu's scanner revealed that it contained her personal log, recorded just before her memory was erased. They played the recovered audio file as they stood beneath the monument. Captain Lee Hana's voice was clear and strong, speaking in Korean. If you are hearing this, then my story has found its way to people who care about truth. The Galactic Council created the Void Plague as a biological weapon. When it escaped their control, they decided to let entire star systems die rather than admit their mistake. I have evidence of their crimes, but I know they will try to silence me. The recording continued. I am leaving this information with the people I saved. They will preserve it in ways that cannot be deleted or corrupted. Look for the stone carver. Symbols. Follow the pattern. The truth is written in stone. As they listened, more people from the hidden village gathered around them. These were not just descendants of refugees. These were the keepers of the monument. Families who had spent their lives adding to the carved record. Every year, we gather here on the anniversary of her death, Mr. Lee Young-ho explained. We add new carvings that tell what has happened since. The memorial is alive, growing, learning. Over the next 3 days, the friends worked with the villagers to decode the information hidden in the monument. The evidence was overwhelming. The Void Plague had been created by a secret research division within the council. When it escaped containment, high-ranking officials had decided to use it as a test of their emergency response systems. Captain Lee Hana had discovered the truth and gathered evidence to expose the conspiracy. But before she could present it to the galactic media, she was arrested and subjected to memory reconditioning. Her ship was reassigned, her crew was scattered, and all official records of her actions were deleted. But the refugees she saved had preserved everything, not just her story, but also the evidence she had died trying to reveal. This changes everything, Yuna said. We are not just preserving the memory of a hero, we are preserving evidence of war crimes. Jisoo agreed. The question is, what do we do with it? Their answer came from an unexpected source. As they prepared to leave New Busan, they received a message from their growing network of investigators. Similar monuments had been discovered on 17 other worlds. All of them contained pieces of the same evidence, all carved in stone and preserved by the families of plague survivors. But more importantly, the network had been contacted by someone new. A former Galactic Council officer named Commander Yuk Dae-hyun, who had served under Captain Lee Hana during the plague crisis. He had been searching for others who remembered the truth. I helped her gather the evidence, his message said. When they erased her memory, I thought the truth died with her. But I kept one copy of the most important files. I have been waiting 5 years for the right people to find me. The pattern was complete. Captain Lee Hana had not just saved refugees. She had created a network of truth keepers who would preserve evidence of the Council's crimes. She had known that digital records could be erased, but stone monuments would endure. The refugees had kept their promise. For 5 years they had carved the truth in stone, waiting for the day when someone would be ready to hear it. That day had finally come. Standing before the massive monument on New Busan, surrounded by the descendants of the people Captain Lee Hana had saved, Jisoo understood the full meaning of her nickname. She was the stone carver not because she carved stone herself, but because she had taught others to carve the truth where it could never be erased. The pattern was spreading across the galaxy, and now it was time to make sure the truth reached everyone who needed to know it. Commander Yuk Dae-hyun looked older than his 52 years. The stress of carrying terrible secrets had carved lines around his eyes and turned his hair gray. But when he met with Kim Jisoo, Park Min-ho, and Choi Yuna on the neutral station of Haven Point, his voice was steady and strong. Captain Lee Hana saved my life twice, he said. First during the plague crisis when she pulled my ship out of an infected nebula. Second when she told me to hide the evidence files before the council came for her. He placed a data crystal on the table between them. Everything is here, Communication logs between council officials planning the plague release. Medical research showing they knew the weapon was unstable. Financial records proving they profited from the chaos that followed. Jisoo picked up the crystal carefully. Why did you wait so long to reveal this? Because I needed to know that someone would be ready to protect it. Captain Lee Hana taught me that the truth means nothing if it cannot survive. She was right. Look what you have built. Over the past month, their network had grown to include nearly 300 people across 47 worlds. Engineers, teachers, archaeologists, farmers, miners, and shop owners. All of them connected by their desire to preserve Captain Lee. Hana's story and the truth she had died protecting, but they had also attracted the attention of Counselor Vexitar and his security forces. 3 network members had been arrested on charges of unauthorized historical research. 2 archaeological sites had been sealed by council authorities. The pressure was building. They know we exist, Yuna said. The question is whether we can get the truth out before they stop us. Minho had spent weeks studying the monument patterns on different worlds. I think Captain Lee Hana planned for this moment. The stone carvings are not just memorials, they are a communication system. When enough people read them, the story spreads automatically. What do you mean? Look at the pattern. Every monument tells part of the story, but no single monument tells everything. People have to visit multiple sites and share information to understand the complete truth. It forces them to build networks, to work together. Commander Yuk smiled. She always was smarter than the rest of us. Even the council officials who erased her memory never understood what they were dealing with. Jisoo had been working on a plan. We have monuments on 47 worlds. We have evidence from the data crystal. We have 300 people in our network. But we need to reach more people before the council can stop us. How do we do that without digital communication? They monitor everything. Yuna had the answer. We use the oldest communication method humans have. We tell stories. The plan was simple but ambitious. Every network member would return to their home world and begin sharing Captain Lee Hana's story. Not through digital channels, but through the ancient human tradition of storytelling. Parents would tell children, teachers would tell students, friends would tell friends. But they would not just tell the story. They would teach people to look for the stone monuments, to read the carved patterns, to understand that the truth was hidden in plain sight across the galaxy. Within 6 months, the effect was remarkable. Children on dozens of worlds began drawing Captain Lee Hana's ship and stars symbol. Adults started asking questions about local memorial gardens and archaeological sites. Families planned trips to visit the stone monuments that were just interesting historical sites. The council's monitoring systems detected increased human activity around memorial sites, but the AIs could not understand what they were seeing. Humans were not communicating digitally about forbidden subjects. They were just telling stories and visiting rocks. Counselor Vexitar grew increasingly frustrated as reports poured in from across the galaxy. Human families were gathering around stone monuments for cultural education activities. Children were playing traditional stacking games that seemed to involve memorizing complex patterns. Adults were signing up for heritage tourism trips to archaeological sites. None of it was technically illegal, but Vexitar could sense the pattern building beneath the surface. The breaking point came when a young journalist named Kim Seo-hyun published an article about the lost heroes of the plague years. She had visited stone monuments on 12 different worlds, interviewed dozens of families, and pieced together enough of Captain Lee Hana's story to write a compelling human interest piece. The article did not mention the conspiracy or the hidden evidence. It simply told the story of a brave ship captain who had saved refugees during a terrible plague, and how the people she saved had built monuments to remember her sacrifice. But the article included detailed descriptions of the monument locations and encouraged readers to visit these inspiring examples of human memorial traditions. Within days, thousands of people were making pilgrimages to the stone monuments. They came as tourists and history enthusiasts, but once they arrived, the monument keepers began teaching them to read the carved patterns and understand the deeper truth. The evidence that Commander Yuk had preserved was secretly added to monuments on 25 worlds. hidden in stone patterns that looked like decorative elements to casual observers. But network members could decode the patterns and access the files that proved the Council's crimes. Vextar finally understood what was happening when security reports showed that over 50,000 humans had visited historical monuments in the past month. The monitoring AIs detected that these visits were highly coordinated, but the coordination was happening through methods that bypassed digital surveillance. Humans were using their own children as messengers, teaching them story patterns that looked like games. They were using traditional art forms and cultural practices to hide information networks. They were turning their monuments into libraries that could not be digitally accessed or erased. They are creating a parallel information system, Vextar's security chief reported. All of their important data is stored in physical form and transmitted through cultural practices. Our monitoring systems cannot track it because it looks like normal human social behavior. Vextar knew he had lost. He could arrest network leaders, but the information was now distributed among thousands of families across dozens of worlds. He could destroy some monuments, but that would only prove that the Council had something to hide. Most importantly, the truth about the Void Plague was spreading beyond human communities. Other species were beginning to ask questions about the Council's response to the crisis. Journalists from multiple worlds were investigating the gaps in official plague records. The stone carvings had done exactly what Captain Lee Hanna intended. They had preserved the truth until the right moment, then released it in a way that could not be stopped or controlled. 2 years later, the Galactic Council underwent major reforms after the plague conspiracy was fully exposed. 3 high-ranking officials were arrested. Victims' families received compensation. New oversight systems were created to prevent future cover-ups. Counselor Vextar was transferred to a minor administrative position on a remote research station. In his final report, he wrote, "The human capacity for collective memory exceeds our previous estimates. Traditional methods of information control are ineffective against species that instinctively preserve important data in permanent physical form. But the most important change was in how humans viewed their own history. Across the galaxy, families began creating their own memorial gardens and teaching their children traditional story patterns. They had learned that the most important truths could not be trusted to digital storage alone. On New Busan, the Great Cliff Monument continued to grow. New carvings appeared each year, telling the stories of other heroes whose memories had been erased or forgotten. The monument had become a symbol of humanity's determination to preserve truth. At the base of the cliff, a simple plaque bore Captain Lee Hanna's final words. "The truth is written in stone." Below that, in Korean characters carved by the hands of children, "And stone endures forever." Kim Jisoo returned to Luna Colony and established a school for traditional memory techniques. Park Min-ho became the director of a new archaeological institute dedicated to preserving physical historical records. Choi Yuna created educational programs that taught children across the galaxy how to read monument patterns and preserve important stories. Commander Yuk Dae-hyun retired from military service and spent his remaining years visiting the stone monuments, sharing his memories of Captain Lee Hanna with anyone who wanted to listen. The captain herself remained officially dead, her memory erased by Council reconditioning 5 years earlier. But her legacy lived on in stone and story, in the hearts of children who learned her name and in the monuments that grew larger each year. The Council had burned her memory from their records, but humans had carved her name in stone, and stone endured forever. Her story had found its way to the people who needed to hear it, and now it would never be forgotten again. The pattern was complete. The truth had survived. The stone carver's work was done.